Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, 6 Ways a Digital Textbook Can Bring Us All Closer Together. I'm Mark Christensen from BibliU, and before we get started, I have just a few quick things to let you know. Please use the chat during the webinar if you have any questions or comments. We set time aside at the end to answer them. Be on the lookout for a few polling questions we have during the webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and we will be sending it out after. And with that, I'd like to welcome our presenters, Andrew, Dave, and Umberto. Gentlemen, if you'd like to introduce yourself and take it from here. Thanks.
Great. So Andrew, do you want to start? We'll go left to right.
It is on the screen, yeah, okay. Hi everyone, my name's Andrew Knight. As it says, I'm the team leader of Collections Discovery Services at the University of Roehampton. Been there for about 3 years. And I coordinate the team in terms of all acquisition purchases, plus subs and other things, but my area of expertise, if I possibly call it that, is in book purchasing. I also happen to sit on the National Purchasing Consortium in the United Kingdom that negotiates deals for all UK universities.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm Dave. I'm the co-founder and chief exec of BibliU. BibliU has a mission and vision to make e-textbooks and other content more accessible and affordable for students, and thereby address a problem I felt myself as a student at university a couple of years ago. Umbi?
And I'm Umberto. I'm head of product at BibliU, and I sort of follow our student-facing product and our institutional-facing product.
Great. So I'll kick this one off. So remote learning's become the new normal. I think particularly, interestingly, we set up this webinar before the CV19 issue really kicked off. So we've twisted the topic a little bit, and I think what we're saying really speaks well to the current environment we're all sort of working through. And yeah, remote learning is certainly the new normal. Core and supplementary textbooks shouldn't be things students worry about. I mean, you look at some of the surveys that are done of students, and it's clear that they can't afford to buy them all themselves. It's clear that they know that by not buying them, their marks will suffer. And it's just sort of one of many financial pressures that a typical university feels these days. So looking at why is a good time to start to look at digital transformation. I mean, clearly many reasons for doing that, particularly under the CV19 conditions we're all facing at the moment, and ensuring that the student experience at home is the same as that it would be on campus. And there are a couple of key things that we're really focused on here, and we'll drill into a bit more today. The first and foremost, I emphasized this before as part of our mission, we want to make content more accessible and provide a higher quality experience. And there are two elements to accessibility. One is financially accessible, so trying to ensure that when a student comes and arrives at university, the resources they have are there and they don't have to spend more of their very limited resources on them. And the other element of the accessibility is ensuring that all students can access the content, whether they have specific learning needs or not. And the content is just really made really nice and easy to digest. And the second point, in ensuring that the data and the data, any interaction with software creates data, and obviously the GDPR constraints around that and how the data can be used is somewhat constrained, but there's so much data being produced at the moment, and often very little of it ends up in the hand of the end user or the institution. And what we've always felt is really important that the institutions have full access to their data, can control their data, and it enables them to make better decisions about their ROI, and specifically on content, like which content is worth investing in, which content's not really working, and the interesting pedagogical discussions that come from that. And then the third and final point is looking to centralize and simplify content delivery, and primarily this is done through automations and things that tools can do to ensure that institutional team members are focused on strategy and creativity rather than day-to-day working on the same thing again and again and again in a sort of very repetitive manner. And automations can really help with things like that. Great. So yeah, just looking at some trends that are happening at the moment. So again, we wanted to dig into the CV19 thing in a bit more detail. So there are 257 US colleges that are confirmed to go online only for the spring. Now that's a massive surge in the previous numbers. You look at the map in the UK, and the majority of institutions are looking to have fully online programs for enabling that spring semester in September. You look at the content side of the industry, and we have all of the major publishers and plus the large majority of the smaller publishers offering free content during the crisis as well, to try and help out the institutions and ensure that we're doing our bit to help society through. And then if you look at where we are, you know, we have 41 universities that we work with all around the world, in the UK, in the US, and Europe. And over this period, we've already had 100 requests for free pilots, and so you can see that there's a massive surge in demand for digital that's happening right now as a result of CV19. And to touch on that, we wanted to drill into sort of what this looks like from a data perspective, and like what does it look like day to day for us. Now you can see here, this is our 2-year map of usage, and we're just looking at a number of daily readers, right? A similar stat to maybe something that Facebook would track. Now the first surge you can see in October is unrelated to CV19 and purely driven by the fact that we've grown rapidly. You know, we've added big institutions like Coventry, who are covering practically every student. We've added institutions in the US like Grand Canyon. So you see the growth that's happened there naturally. But if you compare this year and last year, you can see where Mark's highlighted March 2020, that specifically the March spike, which is tied directly to CV19, is something that we didn't experience last year. You look back in March last year, and the March usage was less than the January usage, where now the March usage is significantly above the January usage, and sort of coming on the peak September October usage, which is fascinating to see. So even this is excluding the new institutions we're having conversations with. Even just looking at our existing user base and the existing technology, clearly students are finding that they're needing to use these digital resources more than they were previously. And perhaps there are individuals that previously weren't very active that are now becoming more active. And to give a taste of the data from another cut, if we're looking at just the average daily reading time per user, we're seeing that that there's a bump there as well. And specifically, it looks like there's a bump related to CV19. So Mark's kindly done a cut, and you can see on the right-hand side that in March, we're sort of trending towards an hour per user as the daily reading time, which is a huge proportion of the time. You know, they've got so many other things to be concerned about, particularly in the current climate. They've got to manage their lectures, they've got to manage whatever can be done around family and social life, given that we're all sort of in lockdown and whatnot. But an hour of the day is a huge proportion, and up significantly from the sort of typical 40 minutes we were seeing last year. And interestingly, you can see the 40 minutes was sort of carried on through to this January. So a really significant surge we've seen this year as well.
And so from a product perspective, there's some challenges that come up due to COVID-19 and due to the data that Dave's already kind of shown. And the first one of these is the number of first-time users that are being onboarded into the platform. There's just a large number of students that are going to be using, you know, our specific platform for the first time, or might actually be using e-textbooks for the very first time. And this is all occurring with a low availability of university support staff. The need for collaboration online is arising. You know, study groups, sharing of ideas, and offering of feedback, all now have to be done online. So these new workflows need to be supported. Things that would normally occur in university grounds or in the library. And last of all, is, you know, accessibility for all. And this is incredibly important because as you're forcing students to move online and consume their content online, you need to make sure that everyone's needs are catered for. And so I guess we can jump straight in here.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in here just because I thought it'd be useful. I mean, obviously, to go back to the title of the whole webinar about bringing people closer together. I mean, obviously, this is an extraordinary situation and one that we could do without, but actually it has thrown up a few opportunities for us at universities, in university libraries. And the very first thing is just publishers and suppliers and aggregators really being very helpful. It's been really gratifying to see, and I do feel like our students are being better supported. It's been hard work for us trying to get our head around. I'm sure everyone around the world feels the same way. But that sort of level of collaboration, but was not really asked for, that's come out of nowhere, is really great to see. So, you know, within this sort of online environment, you can see how they're already beginning the kind of the collaborative nature that we wanted to achieve is starting to be crystallized a little bit quicker, perhaps, than that was happening before COVID-19 came in. So while it's grim and weird, it's sort of having, in a weird way, a sort of opportunity alongside it. The other thing I'd say is that we're just starting at Roehampton. We're quite a small university with a cohort of students that come from really non-traditional academic backgrounds. It's more like an inner city university. We're just beginning to kind of try and measure the impact of this. But I think what it's allowing us to do is to broadcast some of the benefits of online resources that sometimes that message has been difficult to get across to students. So again, in a funny sort of way, this is giving us an opportunity, an extension of what we're doing anyway. So it's kind of interesting to see that even though these are new challenges, they're actually somewhat, they've been in the background of conversations for a little while now anyway. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Okay, so I guess I'll jump straight into the 6 points now. And the first one here is really around making sure that the content that you're making available to students is discoverable in the university. And that means that the content needs to be available where students expect it to be. So it can vary from university to university, but it needs to be embedded in the discovery layer from the library, or it needs to be visible as a link within the student's VLE or LMS. We've done varieties of different integrations with universities, and consistently the highest level of onboarding has been with universities that have gone all the way with integrations that have made the content visible at the discovery layer and have made the content available through the VLE or through the VLE via some specific reading list tool, such as Talus. And this kind of takes us to talking about single sign-on and why it's so important. And the thing is, when the student finds this content, they don't want to have to create new accounts, remember new passwords. They don't want to be frustrated by all these other things. They're just trying to get to their content to study, and you need to make it as easy as possible for that student to find their material. So things like integrations with the learning management system, and single sign-on integrations actually allow students to achieve that. And on the other side, to actually support learning away from these systems and away from the browser and the laptop that the student might have accessed this content in the first place, we make sure that the same methods of sign-on are available through mobile apps and desktop apps. The second point is the ability to search every book at once. This is something that we've seen become extremely important when a university takes an e-textbook or e-book project to scale. And we've seen this happen at institutions where there's possibly, between over 100 to 200 books available to each student. The students actually take a different approach to learning, and it kind of shifts from a learning approach where they come into the platform and go towards a specific page that their lecturer has told them to read up on. to an approach that's more around searching and discovery, and actually looking for not one specific title, but the title that gives them the best explanation to the specific thing that they're trying to learn. And so I'll jump into a quick demo just to give an idea of what I'm talking about here, and see if this. Great. So what I've got here is the BibliU platform. This account has access at the moment to a few thousand books. And what I want to show is how you're actually able, as a student on our platform, to search through not just the titles, not just the books that you have available to yourself, but actually through the content that's inside those books. And that becomes important from a student perspective when you're actually searching for explanations or terminology. So something that I like to use to show this is, I'm trying, as a student, I'm learning about the supply and demand curves, and I'm looking for an explanation of, or the definition of when the supply curve crosses the demand curve. So if I search for supply matches demand, there we go. We get, a couple of books recommended, the books that might, have that terminology in the title or in the chapters. But more importantly, what you see here is that we're actually trying to find the best book to define what you're actually searching for. So here we can see that the market clears when supply matches demand, and the market is in equilibrium. And there it is. So it was equilibrium. That was the word that I was looking for. And when you click on this specific definition, it takes you straight into the book to the specific chapter that you were looking for. And this really helps students get to the best definition for the topic without actually being limited or defined by the constraints of a specific book. And something else interesting here is our ability to search figures. Figure search is something that becomes very important in this specific case. For example, when you actually might be searching for a graph. So if I'm actually looking for the supply curve, I can actually look for the figures, and there it is. So I've had the supply curve returned to me. Now, the way we index this content is not just through the text that surrounds a specific figure, but we actually index the alternative text, and we actually OCR the content that's inside the image to try and get matches from that as well. Now, the third point, and we've already sort of briefly touched on this when we were talking about the challenges that have been brought by COVID-19, is around student collaboration. The point here is that we have to enable and understand that students are going to be shifting from study groups and the sharing of ideas that they might have had within the library or within anywhere else in the university to something online. That might be a Zoom call or Messenger or whatever preferred piece of software they're already using to exchange ideas. We need to make sure that we fit into that workflow as best as possible. And we do that through the ability for students to share snippets of content, share highlights and notes. And of course, being able to share deep links to the content itself. So we noticed that a lot of students actually will copy and paste the URL that they're at and send it to another student. And when the student clicks on it, they're exactly where the other student was. And, they share definitions with each other that way. And they tend to also share the background reading for assignments and stuff like that. And the fourth point here, extremely important, equal access for all. As we mentioned, as we're moving, every student is forced to move essentially to a digital world. It's it's a time to make sure that every student's need is catered for. So it's not just about meeting, WCAG 2.0 compliance or Section 508 compliance. It's actually about making sure that the experience is as comfortable and for any specific student with any need, whether that might be dyslexia, or it might be the need to use a screen reader, or it might just be that your eyes get tired when reading in the evening, so you like to have a couple of different options. All those needs are incredibly important.
Hi, everyone. It's Mark again. This might be a good opportunity to just hit pause and get your thoughts. I'm going to launch a poll question, and then we can look at the results. So I'm going to go ahead and launch it now. If you guys just want to, I'll just take a moment and put in your response and hit submit. Okay, just give it another couple seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and let's look at the results. Interesting. Gentlemen, you want to kind of speak to some of that?
Yeah, I'll throw in a comment. I definitely think, thinking back at my own university experience, one of the reasons, we study on campus, I think one of the most important reasons is to socialize, as well as work with peers, work alongside peers, that sort of thing. So when I was thinking myself what would be most important, I'd definitely say that. I think between online and campus, the disconnect, not being around other people as often, would be the major difference, and certainly challenging as an individual. Humby and Andrew?
I think obviously that's true for those students who come onto campus. That's one of the things that's great about being at university, and it's probably more important than the academic side for those. But I do always bear in mind that in our particular example, on any given day, 9 out of 10 of our students aren't in the library. They may be on campus at university, so fair enough. But from a library perspective, there are a lot of students and users out there who don't daily connect with us except online. So it's interesting that 1 in 3 of the people, virtually just like 1 in 4, are answering access to all forms of content, because in my team, and from my point of view, that is the thing that's being hardest to address, is that there are in our university 300,000 books that no one's been able to access, sitting there collecting dust. So obviously we've had to shift everything online, bearing in mind those other two. I mean, it's not to say that there's a right or wrong answer. So we, mindful of the fact that there is this lack of day-to-day connection, we have to allow for that. But we also need to allow for the fact that there's a dearth of content that students previously had access to that now they can't. And both those things, you add them together, kind of adds up to that final one, that you're supporting different individuals in the ways that they learn. And now we're all having to adapt to something slightly different. So I think it's interesting that, they're all perfectly valid answers. But I guess for all of us, like pretty much everyone in the world now, being connected with people, it's just happening over, computers, isn't it?
I think
Yeah. Go ahead, Humby. Yeah.
The access to all forms of content is an interesting one, because it heavily depends on how digital your university already is. There can be a couple of institutions that might already be supplying the majority of their content digitally. So, COVID-19 might actually not have impacted that significantly.
Yep.
While it may have had a stronger impact on being connected with peers. And I think, Andrew, to your point around not all students physically being present in the library, I think that's very valid, and it comes up through our own student interviews. Before COVID-19 started, there were a lot of students that were actually, collaborating with their peers over Facebook Messenger. And that was actually, their main way of communicating with other students and studying.
And Andrew, I wanted to ask as well, I think we've put forward an offer to institutions of free content for
We lost Dave.
Bit of a connection issue. Okay, should we move on to the next couple of points maybe, or?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Umbi. Why don't we just keep going, and then Dave can join us when he comes back on.
Okay, that sounds good. So is my screen back?
Yep, we're seeing your screen.
Yep. Okay, great. So yeah, the next point here is around analytics, and actually being able to have a deeper understanding of how students operate and participate within the learning content that you're providing. What we actually provide is, real-time data, which actually allows you to drill in very deeply into student behavior. So we try and show you things like patterns around student usage, how often, how regularly they access reading, how long their sessions tend to be. So you can try and get an understanding of what your student cohort actually looks like in terms of their study habits. And the final point here is, some of the metrics that we show is reading engagement for every class. The class level metrics are specifically tailored around professors, possibly. So that professors can actually know how they're engaging with the content. They can understand which sections of the content students might be having particular issues with. And they can, use that data to actually change their teaching styles, or actually just go back to earlier sections that they were teaching that students might not have grasped correctly. Student feature usage is something that we also show, and we actually try and track accessibility indicators to show you how students are benefiting from specific functionality. So it goes a little bit deeper than just the reading, but it actually tries to give you an understanding of how students engage with the content. And the last metric here is around an actual program overview. So if you're providing digital content to a wide cohort of students, you can actually get a high-level view of it all, and so that you can try and inform your spending, and you can get a better understanding of your ROI. And back to you, Mike.
Yep, so let's do another poll. I think it's kind of always interesting to get some insight from our attendees. I'm going to go ahead and set this up for launch. So in regards to our BibliU app, we're interested in seeing what you thought was our biggest increase in a feature. We'll just wait another couple seconds and let everybody put in their submission. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. There you go, gentlemen.
I think this is a fascinating take, and certainly, so when we look at the answer, that actually students are using text to speech a lot more than they were a few years ago, and offline downloads have decreased. And it's quite surprising, because I was quite surprised by the trend as well. And I think, look at the audience responses, I think that's certainly what I would have guessed as well. And I think, you know, you speak to the students, I think it goes to show how well connected we are these days, like how little time there is that we're not connected to the internet. I think, you know, those of us familiar with the London Underground, that's one of the few instances now where you're completely disconnected to the internet. Yeah, Andrew, Umbi, what do you think?
I think that's common sense answers, because that's exactly what I expect. But I thoroughly agree with you that actually we are finding increasingly, measuring our students' engagement with online resources, that they don't really download anymore. That's not something they do, certainly with e-textbooks, because it's app-based. So really, whatever device they've got with them, they're able to use it straight away and continue reading from where they were. I think it's also common sense to think that you might have more support chat, but we've noticed over the last 2 years a really surprising increase in text to speech. Everyone I show that statistic to, we have a little graph, you know, analytics portal. Everyone says, why is that? I don't think we've really got to the bottom of it either. I think it's just demonstrating how differently different users utilize resources. And it also makes you think that, given the fact that we've got a massive load of print stock which can't talk to you, is that something that, you know, our users now require? You know, they're walking around, they've got their headphones on, they are sitting on the bus or whatever it is on the way to university. So they're digesting content in a much more different way than certainly I did when I was a student.
I think specifically with the text to speech, there's a couple of different use cases that we've come across, and the first one is text to speech being used for students to cram learning into, you know, any kind of minute of their day when they might be multitasking with something else. So we have some students that will be using text to speech while they're cooking dinner, or they're using text to speech while driving to university. So they're trying to fill in all those gaps of the day with actual learning. And then there's the other main use case that we found, that's around accessibility. And I think students with dyslexia tend to like text to speech to read it, to go along with text to speech as they're reading. But also, you know, a lot of students without specific accessibility needs have been using it to help them while they're reading. And what they've told us is that it helps them learn and it helps them remember stuff. So, you know, cases that are a little bit out there that we wouldn't have really planned for, but have been really interesting to see develop over time.
Great. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hide the results, and we can continue.
Great. So if we're going on to the next step of don't stress the tech, and I think there's something I'll be really emphasized at the start, and it's particularly important now. We hear from our institutional partners that they don't have time to make decisions, they don't have time to do anything, because they're sort of scrambling to make sure their team and their students can get a basic level of service and a basic level of work. And so it's really key that the setup is as straightforward as possible. And we're finding that really what the institutions are wanting over this period is just send us the content in simple mark record form, we'll ingest it, and that's the setup. Super simple. And consequently, you know, we need to have an SSO integration to enable the functionality that our product offers. And even normally an SSO integration is super straightforward, very simple. But through this period, again, it's something that, you know, the institutions are having to put time into, and something they may not have time to do. But I think it's really important for any technology that's servicing the higher education sector to just make things as simple as possible. It should be, you know, a setup that's as simple as one email back and forth. nice live chat so that the product itself can handle the technical support. There's plenty on the plate of the institution already. They shouldn't have to be the middle person between the student and the product. And importantly as well, nice, short, snappy videos to educate users, and users being both the institution and the students as well.
I would definitely second that. I mean, over the last 2 weeks, I'm sure all of you out here have experienced the same thing of a mad scramble to get everyone just basically set up. So to have, you know, a platform where it essentially frees up our time. There's quite a lot of user education going on at the moment just to kind of get people set up. So we're trying to onboard virtually the whole student population and the staff population, for that matter, the academics, to get them used to online learning and teaching. So to then try and onboard students with a new platform that has a kind of, you know, some kind of technical obstacle to overcome is not going to happen, frankly. We just literally don't have the time to do that. So what we really are looking for is something, I mean, the big gap for us now, for my team especially, is no one can access print textbooks. So we need to be able to deliver something that is at least equal or potentially an even better version of that. And I don't have time, my team doesn't have time to be, you know, coming up with solutions to technical difficulties. We already still have obviously all our other online resources that don't necessarily play ball when you want them to. So I guess that's the thing, we're already using the BibliU platform. So for us, it was a no-brainer to say, well, look, that's already in place. Some academics are familiar with it, some students are familiar with it. And we just want the most straightforward, least hassle option out there. And as I said before, everyone's been very generous with their time, but actually it's great for our students. It's actually been a little bit of a headache for us. We've been inundated with very generous offers, but actually trying to manage that and administer that has been quite challenging. So for me, for the solution to my students not having access to core textbooks in the library, it has to be the most straightforward one.
Okay,
Great. So happy to answer any questions from the floor. Sorry, Mark, I'll let you carry on.
yeah, go right ahead, Dave. Are you able to see the questions sitting in the chat on the dashboard?
I cannot. Maybe if you read them out, Mark,
Yeah, let's do
one
that.
by one, we can then answer them.
Let's see. So this question is around accessibility. And so the question is, how are people with vision or issues with vision being addressed with accessibility?
Yeah, I can answer that question. So basically, I think if you have a vision impairment, it's important that you are able to use whatever tools you're familiar with on any platform. So for us, the biggest focal point there is making sure that we're compatible with any text-to-speech or external screen reader tools. And that's something that we've had a very strong focus on. So students with accessibility needs will struggle to have to be forced to use a new piece of software entirely. So we need to try and give them as much familiarity as possible. We have some features like inbuilt text-to-speech tool, inbuilt screen reader, but the most important thing for these students is actually to be compatible with whatever they're using and to be intuitive, you know, in how we operate with those tools.
Mm-hmm. Here's another question. It's in regards to data. Does the real-time data track information on specific identifiable users? And if so, how do you make that information FERPA and ALA privacy compliant?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And the regulations have become increasingly stricter over time, as they should. And so the way to, I mean, what any software normally does is track every action of every user. Now, there's a difference between having a uniquely a unique user in the database that's anonymized with a uniquely identifiable user. So by default, our software and any software today, without need to make sure that all of that's anonymized. So although we can say, this user's highlighted this, there's no way that we could possibly identify who that person is. Naturally, there are institutions who do like to know which student has done what for the purposes of student engagement, for the purposes of retention, well-being. There are many good causes for this. And in those cases, the institution needs to present to us a contract they have with the student. Often they've developed at the start of the year that says, yes, we have the GDPR consent from this individual. And consequently, then we can provide the institution with unique strings, identifiers that they can then link back to those individuals and then decode that. But the way it's structured is the institution sends us random strings, and there's no way for us to know who's doing what. And that's the way it should be. I mean, there's a great deal that can be done with that data to help the student experience, ensure students, well-being, that sort of thing. But the privacy is of utmost importance.
This question is around implementation and getting set up and starting and how to go about doing that. What's the time frame?
Yeah, so I'll jump in again. It'll be interesting to get Andrew's perspective on this, because I'm sure it varies a lot depending on what the software is and what the software's for. So typically we like to say that once we've agreed on the content you want, which we can either recommend or you can ask for, either way, it should be a fairly straightforward process of a couple of hours, just emails back and forth, making sure the SSO is linked up properly, making sure that the tech support on your side is properly trained and that their access is working nicely and they've confirmed access to the content's working nicely. So it should be a couple of hours. I mean, in theory, if you had all the right people on a Zoom call or a Skype, you could get it done very, very quickly in less than an hour. But typically most institutions like to just do it asynchronously by email, so the emails sort of bounce back and forth as progress happens.
Yeah, I'd say it's really just that conversation between your institutional IT service team, whoever it is, and the people at BibliU, and let them crack on with it. I mean, the only thing that I have to really worry about is being the conduit for content that comes from another team, comes from our academic engagement team, and comes through to me in collections. And then I'm able to just send it off by email. And turnaround time is, reasonable. I guess quite busy at the moment, though, guys.
Very busy,
yeah. Here's a question looking for some tips on how to encourage students to go and actually read the core text. Does anybody have any suggestions that they'd like to share?
I would just say, from our experience, we've had this product for 2 years now, and we've not purposely, but as a sort of control, I guess, when we started as a pilot, as a control, we had a couple of academics who went in and really, really pushed their students to download the app. In fact, I think one of them made them do it all in their first seminar. And then there were some other academics who were, I don't want to say less engaged, but they were obviously busy doing something else. And I think in order to really encourage your students to use it, you have to have the buy-in of your academics. We're sort of set up to do that anyway. We have a very, very reading list oriented way of delivering teaching at Roehampton. But I would say, looking at the analytics after that first year, the books where a librarian and a academic were very much on board and did a lot of work around promoting and going through it, their usage and their levels of engagement were through the roof. It was astonishing, but we don't get stuff like that. Whereas the ones where there was less broadcasting or less publicity, shall we say, the usage was more modest, as you would expect. I think on a day-to-day thing, I don't work in a student-facing team, so all I see is the data, and I get some kind of, through the grapevine. But what I would say is that features help. If your platform has good features, for highlighting and text-to-speech. We see, we compare usage across all of our platforms, and those that have high levels of accessibility and high levels of interactivity, I suppose you could say, tend to be used more. It's an age-old question, because we often wonder, what are academics teaching in the classroom? None of us really know, and a lot of it just comes down to the content. If the book is good, it'll be well read, it'll be well shared, and if the book is not very good, then people aren't going to read it. Slightly reductive analysis there, I appreciate that. There you go.
This question, would you be able to talk about BibliU's purchasing models or how title acquisition works on the platform?
Yeah, sure. So we try and offer as many access models as possible to therefore let the institution decide what's best for them. So that ranges from a broadening access model, which is usually for textbooks, and essentially any student on campus can access that textbook when the core enrollment is paid for. We've then got seat credits for textbooks, which is where only the number that actually use the content are paid for, or a fixed volume up front are paid for, and that's the fixed number that are paid for, so it's not unlimited as such. Then we've got the traditional unlimited concurrent user model, which is a title the institution will buy and own perpetually, and an unlimited number of students can access that. We've got the concurrent user models, so you could have one concurrent user, the institution owns that title and only one student will use at a time. And then the access credits as well, sometimes known as non-linear lending. So the other different access models, we try and let the institution purchase either through title by title, or more recently we've rolled out user activated acquisition, a bit like PDA, and EBA, or evidence-based acquisition as well. So essentially, if you're an institution that buys content, we look to provide you with the workflow that you're used to and the access models that you prefer. At the end of the day, we want to provide you with the content you want in the model that you want, if possible.
So we have about a few minutes left, and this is a good opportunity for you gentlemen to kind of share out your highlights, and if you want to emphasize some things from our webinar today, this would be a good opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I'll kick off with the closing remark. I think these are unprecedented times, and clearly very, very difficult times for us as a society, and I think in some ways it's brought the best out of the sector. We see more collaboration than I've ever seen, and Andrew said, like, some of the best free offers he's ever seen as well. And hopefully, we can work together to all do our bit to ensure the students have a good experience. And I think, it's going to be difficult if September comes around and things aren't back to normal. There may be less students, that particularly international students, that are enrolled. There'll probably be slightly more domestic students, given the nature of the fact that in recessions that universities only have more students. So there are a lot of challenges coming, and I just think it's really important that we work well together and sort of break down some of the barriers that may have existed historically in the sector.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think it's throughout, even within universities, people are talking to each other who traditionally don't talk to one another. And I think it's interesting that this is really just a catalyst, I think, though. I mean, a lot of these conversations, I've been having them for years, but there is beginning to get some traction, that people have, ebooks have been around a long time, and online learning's been around a long time, but it's certainly in the UK, it seems to have hit a bit of a plateau. There seems to be this difficulty of, if you look at the way the journals went, I mean, they're almost exclusively online now, but books has not really happened. I'm not saying we want to get rid of print books, but from my point of view, we have an awful lot of users who don't come to the library, as I mentioned at the top. And a lot of them don't really feel that connected at any time. They are disengaged, they are remote. And so we've been trying to think of ways to make sure that we listen to their voice. How do we even, find out what they feel? I mean, it's very difficult to get in touch with these people. So I think an online presence if it isn't the primary thing, it has to be at least an equivalent version of your library. We just spent an enormous amount of money building a nice new library at Roehampton, and it is lovely. But the mission has to be that the online version of our library, as much or more needs to be invested in that, because there are so many users who don't come into the premises. So I think there is a wisdom in delivering or developing digital content. I think it's, as I said, it's beginning to gain more traction, and I just feel, and you know, it's very difficult to have a positive spin on much at the moment. But you know, I feel that we have to kind of look for that, to see this as an opportunity. Like, we are now framing conversations around accessibility, and we don't want to have platforms that aren't accessible regulatorily and also morally. You know, we shouldn't be doing that. Discovery has been an issue for a long time. So if you have a platform that has in-platform searching, that's very helpful for us. I just think, you know, now is a time where we want to have more of these conversations. It's under the spotlight, and I want to keep it there, really. So, you know, looking to the future, these are conversations that are no longer in the background. They don't go away. We don't just say, oh, that was just because there was a pandemic. This is now the new normal. This is the way we're going to be doing things. And I think we should have been doing that anyway. So it's interesting that this is just kind of, as I said before, crystallized, you know, the direction of travel that existed anyway.
And just to add to that, I really hope these conversations continue when things do sort of go back to normal as such, and that there are some beneficial changes that have happened as a result. Umbi?
Yeah, I think you know, you can draw a parallel in the working world where everyone's, you know, currently working from home, and you would think that when we go back to work, to the office, there will be greater flexibility around how you can work and being able to work from home. And the same thing is, you know, something that could happen in the university sector, where you know, the libraries will reopen, students will go back to the library, but in the meantime, there's been this opportunity to actually create this alternative way of working for students, where they can actually access content from home, and they can actually, you know, they're not actually forced to physically be in the university to actually study.
But funnily enough, despite all of that, it seems to me that actually there is a greater level of connectivity around the university than there was 2 months ago. Because everyone has had to focus their attention, you know, even though we're not physically seeing one another. I feel like there are more conversations going on. Academic staff and their students, and we as support staff, are having more conversations. We are having to, and I think that's a great precedent to be set. And long may it continue, just not under these circumstances, you know.
Well, thank you. I think this was very insightful and very informative. We appreciate everybody who has attended today, and we will be sending out this recording. So I'd like to say thank you to you three. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark, for hosting, and thanks everyone for joining.